Today I'll be talking about William Blake's poems titled The Chimney Sweeper, from his Songs of Innocence and Experience written in the late 1780s and early 1790s. I'll be taking a new historic approach, and so I'll be grounding them within the historical time frame of the 18th and 19th century, using an article published in the Edinburgh Review in 1819 by an English Anglican cleric named Reverend Sydney SMith. His article is titled Chimney Sweepers, and in it he relays an interview with a master sweep who was once a climbing boy himself. To start out, I would like to give a little bit of information on what a chimney sweeper is, a little bit of historical background. Chimney sweeping started in England in the 16th century. Chimney sweepers would be sent to climb up chimneys in order to clean the soot out of them so that the chimneys wouldn't catch fire. It was considered a necessary evil at the time and was mostly ignored by the rest of society. It was out of sight, out of mind. Boys that were used were primarily from the ages of 4 to 10, but some smaller children could stay in up until the age of 16. The chimneys they were climbing were anywhere from 7 inches to 12 inches wide, so it's a pretty tight fit even for a boy of that age. In the 16th century, when it first started, chimneys were only in noblemen's houses for the most part, so it wasn't really something that the regular people saw often, and so it wasn't hard to not pay attention to. But around 1780s, during the Industrial Revolution, more chimneys were put into houses of people that I guess you would consider a middle class, and so chimney sweeps came into a much higher demand. And so because of that, it became impossible for society to completely ignore it. In the early 1780s, Jonas Hanway was the first to propose a bill that would make it illegal for the boys to sweep chimneys without at least protective clothing, and he also put some stipulations to help protect these boys from harm, exploitation, and abuse from their masters. He did not get the bill passed, but he was influential in future laws, notably that of 1788. It was an act from Parliament that was put into place to protect the boys. It proved a dead letter. People really didn't care. They went on doing the exact same practices as they always did, because that's just how they did it. They didn't know another way to do it, and at that point, there was no other technology to clean them that worked as well or better than the boys themselves. This act proved useless, but it did catch the attention of reformist activists and authors, including that of William Blake, who wrote his poems not long after this act. William Blake was a poet, painter, and printmaker who lived from 1757 to 1827. He was largely unrecognized in his time, but nowadays he's considered to be one of the greatest poets to come out of England during the Romantic Age. So I would like to begin by reading the Song of Experience, the Chimney Sweeper, Songs of Innocence, the Chimney Sweeper, sorry. So, when my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. So that second line, my father sold me. This wasn't uncommon. Many of the chimney sweeping boys were sold as if slavery. It was considered an apprenticeship at the time, but it was pretty much slavery. A lot of the boys were also orphans who were just picked up on the streets when they were extremely young. The last line there, in soot I sleep, it wasn't uncommon for them to sleep on the soot of what they had swept that day. Reverend Smith, in his article, quotes this, saying, the bed of these poor little wretches is often the soot they have swept in the day, with some evidence taken from the master sweep himself, saying that when he was a child, it was something that he often did. So I'm going to continue here. There's little Tom Dacre who cried when his head that curled like a lamb's back was shaved, so I said, Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. Coffins of black being the soot that was often caked to their bodies for years at a time. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. And down a green plain leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river, and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father, and never want joy. So, those last two lines I just read, the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God as his father, and never want joy. Here he's saying, listen to your master, both God and the master sweeper. Be a good boy, meaning put your life in danger, and you will never want joy. Those last three words, never want joy, it's a very cryptic way to say that. It is obviously posed as if you will always be happy, but I don't think that's what William Blake means here. I think he really means that the boy should stop searching for a way out. They should just accept their fate of being a chimney sweeper until they're too big to eventually fit up the chimney, and then they will just be thrown out on the streets. It's not a line that's supposed to invoke joy. It's supposed to invoke hopelessness, I think. So the last stanza, and so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. That last line being the most ominous in the entire poem. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm, implying that you will fear harm if you're not a good boy, and that's something that was very much true. The master sweeper talks about the ailments that he had during his climbing days, and pretty much every boy had these. Quote, the skin was completely off my knees and elbows too. Just entire parts of their arms and knees would just be skinless and calloused over and bruised, and oftentimes they would end up being crippled later in life because of this. He also said that a boy getting stuck in a chimney to the point of it being necessary to break the chimney to get him out was at least a monthly occurrence. Quote, they often blame the boy's neglect, unquote. Close unquote. They could get stuck for 2 or more hours within this tiny space in the chimney covered by soot, breathing it in and out. Another quote from the Master Sweep on this topic, I have been up more than 40 chimneys where I have been burnt. Boys get very ill-treated if they don't go up a chimney that is on fire. Alright, so with that, I'm going to close the first poem, and I'm going to move on to the Chimney Sweeper within Songs of Experience. This one's a much shorter poem, so I'm just going to read it all the way through instead of stopping like I did with the first one. A little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep, in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother, say? They are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath, and smiled among the winter snow, they clothed me in clothes of death, and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. So the very first line, a little black thing among the snow. They can often go years without being washed. The Master Sweep in the interview says, quote, I can take an oath on the Bible that my master never found me one piece of soap during the entire time I was an apprentice. He doesn't say exactly how long he was an apprentice, but it can be inferred that it was probably at least 5 years. Just a few lines after that, we see that the father and mother have gone up to the church to pray. This means that this kid is unusually a chimney sweeper whose parents are still involved with him. This was something that happened, but it was pretty uncommon. Usually in these cases, parents couldn't afford to feed their child, or they couldn't afford to house the child, and so they would sell them into these harsh apprenticeships to make a little bit of extra money for themselves, as well as give their kid a little bit of food, even if it wasn't much. The next line that I think is important is in that last stanza, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king. The church here is used in a similar way as it is in the first poem as an escape from the tragedy of the reality, but it's expanded upon. In the first poem, the blame is pushed onto the chimney sweeper to be a good boy, with God standing in for the master sweeper as the punisher, but God also representing Redeemer and the escape from the suffering. In the second poem, the blame is pushed onto the parents, but through association, it denounces not only the adults in society who turn a blind eye, but the church and the state as well. And most damning of them all, the blame is also pushed onto God himself. The last line of the poem, and I think the most important and the most chilling, is who make up a heaven of our misery. Together it is, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king who make up a heaven of our misery. So the people who are making up the heaven of misery are God, priest, king, that of the highest ranks of society, and it is their heaven, but it is our misery. So this meaning that the upper class of society, the ones who have the chimneys, are living comfortably because and despite of the immense suffering of these children. And I would like to bring in a quote from Reverend Smith to close this out that I think really touches on the absurdness of this, the macabre nature, and just the vileness that is this heaven of our misery. Quote, "There is a positive prohibition of the practice of sending boys up chimneys aflame, and an enactment of penalties in one of the Acts of Parliament which respects chimney sweepers. But of what matter is an Act of Parliament when the pleasures of gentle people are concerned? What is a toasted child compared to the agonies of the mistress of the house with a deranged dinner?" And with that, I would like to close this out. I hope everyone's having a good week, a good month. Hopefully we'll be able to get back into class soon. See ya.